Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar series. Joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. I hope you're all having a great session out there. Today our topic is a little bit different. We have seen some very interesting changes go on with regards to personal finances, women's role in personal finances, and as we're seeing, more and more women are becoming involved. And this is not a good thing. This is a great thing. It is an incredibly important thing. And we're going to show you some facts, figures, statistics about why it's happening, the significance of it, and why we feel it should increase. So today's topic of discussion is the power of partnership, women in personal finance. Now this is going to be a kind of a broad overview of kind of the transitions that have happened through the course of history to bring us to where we are today. This is for educational purposes and is not intended to be investment advice. Of course, I'm not making any investments decisions here today. I would also encourage you guys to join us by participating. You can feel free to send us messages. We are streaming live right now on YouTube, so you can feel free to participate and send in questions as you'll see me looking over my shoulder periodically to answer those questions. So let's start off with the historical perspective. When we look at the historical perspective of personal finance, it's really kind of clear-cut. I mean, if you watch any sitcom from the 50s and 60s, it was pretty much the man comes home from work, he's been working all day. They're the sole breadwinners, right? They worked. It's what they did. Men came home, they worked, they finally get home, they put their feet up on the couch, the wife brings them a beer, and they watch some TV, and maybe they play with the kids for a little bit. But pretty much the man was the sole breadwinner. The woman's role was very different, and this is, culturally created, but basically it was the June Cleaver, leave it to Beaver type of attitude, where all day long she was cooking, she was cleaning, she was taking care of personal home finances. Now, granted, most housewives weren't cleaning in a dress and a pearl necklace like June Cleaver was, but it did kind of create that vision that that's what the woman's role was. The woman's role was to cook and to clean, raise the family. But while doing that, who do you think had a better pulse on the personal finances that were going on at home? Was it the husband who was working all day to bring home the check, or was it the woman who was out shopping, taking care of the kids, making sure all of the budget items were in place? So while men were historically the ones that were making all the financial planning decisions, secretly the women were the ones who had an incredible amount of information and data that really wasn't being utilized. Now we've seen some other changes happen out there, and this is kind of an alarming stat, and I kind of brought it a little bit too far forward, but we'll start with education. I think a lot of this has to do with education, because again, remember, women weren't really supposed to be getting educations. They were supposed to be staying home with the kids and preparing the house and food and all that. So here is a chart of the percent of women and men in the U.S. with college education going back to the 1940s, and you can see it was a tiny 3.8% of women back in 1940 had college degrees versus 5.5% of men. And as you can see, as we went through the 50s, the 60s, and even the 70s, there was a huge separation. Men had far greater degrees, at one point almost 2-to-1 degrees over women. Now, you'll notice that as we start to get to the hard red edge of this chart, things slowly started to change. It's still a big gap, but it was starting to get a little bit closer. You started to see more women getting involved with education in the 80s and 90s, but I'll show you an updated version of this as we progress to really bring home the transition that has happened. So that's where we were. We were at a phase where, again, leave it to Beaver, make a cake, I come home as the breadwinner, and you're cooking all my food and taking care of it. It's not really equal, is it? Then something happened. A little event called World War II. And it's not that that was the turning point, but it was one of the major milestones for equal rights for women in society. And you guys might remember this picture, Rosie the Riveter. And when called upon to help support the country, women answered the call. And they went out and did jobs that typically men did, right? Typically women weren't allowed in those positions. No, you're not going to go to a factory and become an iron worker. Well, you know what? We need you. Hey, you know what? They stepped up and they did an absolutely incredible job. So from an empowerment perspective, this was one of the major turning points for everything we're going to discuss today. From there, we moved on to, I guess, a transitional period. After the war, women went back to their roles, but there was this, hey, you know what? I kind of liked working, or I want to work to bring home money into the family. So we started to see women continuing to work. And that was maybe on a part-time basis because they still had a lot of responsibilities at home, taking care of the kids. So there was this transition from you're no longer exclusively just a housewife, you are now getting an education, you are now working and maybe bringing in some extra income. So from there, they started to take a bigger role in their finances. And as I mentioned earlier, to me it's kind of important because they knew the intimate details of how much am I spending on food? How much am I spending on clothing for each member of the family? What are the utility bills? They knew the budgets, so they could clearly take the income that was mostly coming from the husband at that point and say, all right, let's balance out and see where we are financially. Even though the man was still making the long-term investment decisions, the budgeting was done typically by the wife. So we are now in a different situation, a very different situation, I might add. And especially if you live in Southern California, a very different situation. We now have two people usually generating income. And there was a separation. It used to be that men made a lot more. That is actually starting to close as well. But you had two people working. I remember growing up, both my parents had full-time jobs. And they were both contributing to that home, economy or a home balance. Now, with those two incomes, women started to say, you know what, I want to be a little bit more involved. I'm now an income provider, and in some cases, they may actually be the sole income provider. You might have a single mother, or they might not be married. It might just maybe a divorced partner or something like that, but they may be the sole income provider. So they started to become much more involved. Now, that leads us to the education aspect, and this is very, very interesting. If you look from 1988, we still had that big separation where only 17% of women had degrees versus 24% of men. But notice what's happened since 1988 through till 2017. We have that gap closing. And you'll notice that I'm going to have my producer draw a little marker on the cursor here. Right here between 2013 and 2014. Sadly, it took this long for this to happen. But it has happened. And between 2013 and 14, you'll notice that women now have more degrees than men. And this is women with individuals with a 4-year degree or above. So this could be master's, PhD, etc. You notice in 2017, we're looking at 34.6% of women have a 4-year degree or better versus 33.7% of men. So a great thing to see when we look at equality and women's role, not only in society, but in our home life, as our discussion here is today, in budgeting. Very important to see this happen. There's a greater understanding of how the markets work. There's a greater understanding of personal finance and a whole bunch of other subject matter. So this has been an interesting transition that's been a long time coming, and they recently took the lead. Guys, you got to catch up here. So what does that do to us today? What does our modern household partnership look like? Well, we have a situation where both partners are contributing to that household income. So what used to be just one individual and bringing it all in, and then the wife usually portioning it out, here we have both people bringing in. So we have a lot more household income. Now, we still have a situation where the men are generally in control of personal finances, but now it's a shift that's just happened, kind of like the education piece. Just recently, we've seen a shift where 51% of females are taking reins of household income planning and personal finance planning within the household. So that is another change that's happened that is rather significant. Now, when you look at the amount of involvement, most of the studies that I've looked at show that women are certainly involved in the discussions, but the man still makes the final decisions with regards to some of these personal finance decisions. That is starting to change as well, and you'll see here in a minute why. So what we want to make clear is that both people should be making decisions in the personal financial, household income spending, etc. Now, of course, we have different society now. It used to be a traditional marriage, but we have non-traditional marriages out there. So regardless of what your partner, your marriage looks like, your partner should be involved in those decisions. It's a checks and balances thing, which I'm going to look at here in a little bit. And it becomes crucial for us to make sound, solid investment decisions that's right for the entire family and for the family unit. Now, when it comes to those decisions, remember, what are we looking at here? It's not just what's our family budget. And you've probably seen some webinars before on behalf of OTA Academy and Online Trading Academy where I've talked about one of the greatest things you can do to increase your personal wealth is start budgeting. Look at your household spending. So that's one aspect of what do we do with our household income? What is that money comes in, where does it go? Is it going to groceries, utilities, gym memberships, etc.? From there, there's other key considerations. Things like our 401ks, our retirement plans. Who's investing in those? Who's making those decisions? College planning is obviously a big one for anybody in our audience here today who has kids. This could be a huge expense, hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on where your kid goes. You could also have more than one kid, which really starts to add up. And then one that really nobody talks about, and maybe it's just me, but I've always had this view of Social Security as I'm paying into it and I'm just going to pull it out at some point. It is far more complex than this. Social Security is a major decision that needs to be made by both partners if you are married when you start to get close to that retirement age. So these are decisions that both people should be a part of and have a say in what goes on. So why is a woman's role in finance critical? Well, there's some real key facts here as to why you should be involved. Number one, women live longer. I know, men. We got to turn the tides here. I don't know why that is, but this is the U.S. statistics, and this I was going back to 2017, so we might be a little bit more now. But women are living 81.3 years on average. Men, 76.5. So the ladies have a 5-year bonus run after we go. Now, of course, those are averages, not to say that your wife will always outlive you, but that's just the stats out there that we have. And of course, this definitely varies from culture to country. There's a lot of different factors here, so we just did a broad number stroke over life expectancy in the U.S. Now, why is this important? Well, if the man is making all the decisions about 401ks, about retirement, about investment accounts, about college, Social Security, and that individual passes away, the wife is left not knowing where all these investments are made, not knowing what the plan was. So from that perspective, it's critical that women are more involved because you need to know where everything is at. At a minimum, know where everything is at. The second part here is that women, as we mentioned earlier, usually have a greater understanding of budgets. And one of the great things I've been able to do in my life is really map out budgets. So I know how much I can spend each month, I know how much I can spend each year, and that allows me to say, all right, I'm saving at this rate, therefore I can grow this account this much, I can put more in this trading account, and I can start to really target my goals and objectives. If you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I just went and bought some dinner today at the end of the month, I don't know, I just spent a bunch of money on food and utilities, you don't have a clear-cut picture of planning. You don't understand exactly where your numbers will be at the end of the month, the year, or even the week. So planning is critical, and since historically the women's role has been that, they generally have a greater understanding of the spending day to day. Now, of course, some of you are shaking your head right now going, no way, my wife is out of control spending. This is why we want to do it as a partnership, because there's checks and balances. When both people are looking at a budget, at a plan, you can keep each other accountable. So, for example, let's say your wife just loves new shoes. I have a good friend of mine, I swear she spends an entire year's salary on shoes a year. Well, she's single. If she was married, and that checks and balances, okay, honey, you can only get one new pair of shoes a month, not one a week or one a day. Checks and balances are key. Also, for men. All right, husband, you've been going to the bar 3 days a week. Let's cut that back to one. Save spending a little bit here because we need to target our 401ks. We need to target our college for our kids. Let's budget and plan. Accountability is key here, and that's why women, I think, it's critical that they play a role in personal finances. Now, they may earn even more. Yes, we've been hearing about this for so many years that there's this big wage gap. Well, there is historically. So this image might get a little bit blurry out here, but I want you to start on the right-hand side here. And what we're looking at is the median weekly earnings of men and women who are full-time wage and salary workers. So part-timers, sorry, they're not in here. This is just full-time. I know I was just digging for statistics here. And this is as of 2016. So on the right-hand side, you see here 65 and older. Men made a lot more. $1,000 a week is what men were making. Women, $750. That's a 25% difference there between men and women in the older age brackets. Now, as we drop down here to 55 to 64, you notice that that is still a huge gap. Men look like they're making about $1,100. Women look like they're making about $800. Now, the next 10-year bracket, from 45 to 54, men are making a little bit less, but women are making a little bit more. And that's this bar right here. So you can see it's starting to change a little bit. Next bracket down, 35 to 44 years old, all of a sudden that difference here between men and women wage earnings is starting to shrink. The men in the 35 to 44 bracket making $1,000 a week, that's the same as men who are in their 60s and older. But the women are making a lot more. You can see right now on this 35 to 44 bracket, the women are making about $850. Now if we go to the younger generation, that 25 to 34 years, notice the men are making less, but the women are making more. And the even younger ones, we're talking the just into the workforce, they're almost even. So we're getting to that point now where wage equality is a real thing, not a pipe dream that would have seen 30, 40, and 50 years ago where women making money, that doesn't happen. Now it's almost even, which is a great sign, especially when we look at household formation and household income. Another reason that women's role in finance is critical is that they're more willing to engage in it. I think that there's been almost an oppression for women with regards to being in control of their personal finances, and there's this eagerness to learn about it. One of the things that I'm really excited to have seen over the years is when I started taking classes at Online Trading Academy back in 1998, I was the second class that they had. And in that classroom, it was 30 other people. There was one woman in the class. One. And over the years that I've taught for Online Trading Academy, I've taught from 1998 to 2001 is when I was active full-time in the classroom teaching. That transition, I could see it slowly change. And it was a great thing to see. I'll talk about some of my observations here later about the characteristics of women as traders and investors and as money savers versus men. But now you're getting to the point where I would say our classes are probably 40 to 50% female, where it's just about even there, which is great because, like I say, they need to be a part of that discussion about what we are spending our money on in our households. Why else is it important for them to be involved in this? Well, first off, they're more willing to take education, as I just pointed out. This is actually a great screenshot from one of our classes. We have Diana Hill instructing a class here. So not only are they students, but they're actually becoming experts in subject matters and going out there and teaching it and sharing their knowledge about specific asset classes. And of course, education is probably the single greatest way to get involved in your personal finances, understand how it works, and then work together with your partner to make your personal financial dreams come to life. The other discussion here is Social Security. Now, this is one I could spend probably an hour on, but I'm not going to torture you with that. What I would encourage you to do, if you'd like to learn more about the topics as I present them here, is to go to otacademy.com and type in Social Security. We built a series of videos on Social Security, which I think are which are great for us in understanding this wonderful system of Social Security. I say that sarcastically because I personally don't think it will be there when I get to retirement. However, you can still plan on it. And here's why it's important. I never really took a class on Social Security in high school or college. It's just something that we've known that, okay, every day I go to work, there's a little chunk that's being paid out to Social Security. I'm paying for a past generation. Fine, I'm okay with that. What they don't tell you is the strategies involved. It's kind of like saying, yeah, if you just put your money in a 401k account, it'll grow and you'll be rich over time. Really? No. There's investments I need to make. There's decisions that I could make which could impact the rate of return in that 401k. That said, when we look at something like Social Security, there are a lot of different allocations we can make. And when I say allocations, it's not like you can choose your investments. You can't say, put me in a bond fund versus a stock. But what you can do is you can pull money out early. So for example, you have 65, 66 is your full retirement age. You can start at 62, but you'll be making a lot less of Social Security. You could wait all the way till 70 where you're forced to take distributions and you're going to be making about 32% more of your typical full retirement age payments. That's easy if you're by yourself as one individual. If you're married, this now becomes a very, very interesting chess game because one of you can start withdrawals early, one of you could start late. You could also start looking at each other's salary and income to see who would be getting what rate at what time. It's a rather complex system, but we have a great video on the different strategies out there so you can get an idea of how to start to play this chess game. Now, why should women be involved in this? Because you making the decisions on your own about when you take Social Security, that's up to you, that's fine. But if you start strategizing with your significant other, you can start to increase the money that you will get at retirement and do it very strategically because it's not just your Social Security. It's how your taxes are going to be on top of Social Security, etc. So it really is all about planning, and as we've already seen, generally, women are really good with setting plans and implementing those and sticking with them. All right. Now, we don't want to think about divorce, but what if you're married and you get divorced? Well, we know that a lot of marriages fail out there, and if the man is in charge of all the personal finances, you're going to have a much more difficult time navigating through that divorce, right? Where's the house asset? Well, that's probably pretty easy. You're living in it, or you might have some investment properties. But what about different investment accounts? What about retirement accounts? What about pensions? What about safe deposit boxes or other assets, artwork, royalties that you might have been as a musician? Where are your bonds and things like that? By knowing where everything is at, you set yourself up to be in a great position. Obviously, that's not what we're looking for. We're not saying, hey, you want to be involved with personal finances so you know where everything's at. It's really more about knowing where it's at and saying, let's grow those assets together. Divorce, unfortunately, is a reality that many people will face, so it is in your best interest to be in touch with your personal finances so you at least know that. Now, the last one here is probably one of the sadder ones, but we've already looked at life expectancy in the U.S. 81.3 years for women, 76.3 for men, which means women live longer. So ultimately, when we look at this picture, you might have a situation where one of those rings disappears. Death of a spouse. And again, that transition, the whole probate process, by knowing where everything is at, will be much, much simpler. Of course, we could talk about estate planning, we could talk about wills and trusts, which could also be a benefit, but you can find out more information about that at otacademy.com. We've got some great videos on estates, wills, and trusts as well. All right, so let's talk about checks and balances. This is one of my personal favorites, and I'm going to talk to you about my personal observations that I've seen as an instructor for trading and investing for over 20 years. Now, when we leave all the decisions to men, which was our leave it to beaver type of era in the 40s and 50s, what happens is we get a skewed, let's say the teeter-totter. It's like riding a teeter-totter with one person on it. That's not really exciting, right? What we want to do is we want to bring in our partner into this, and that will help balance things out. Now, it's not to say that your partner is smarter than you. It's not an intelligence contest, but it's checks and balances. It's a way for us to bounce ideas off of each other. And when we look at the checks and balances piece, it's important to know our strengths and weaknesses because we're all bringing something to the table. Now, as I run through these, just understand that these are broad overviews and just general observations. This isn't going to be true for everybody. But having been an instructor and watched men for a long time as traders and investors, generally, men are impulsive. Generally. When I say impulsive, it just means that they'll see an opportunity and they're very quick to say, I'm going to act on opportunity because time is of the essence, right? The neighbor tells them about a great stock pick, here's an investment idea. Oh, I got to do it real quick. Whereas the women tend to be more patient, detail-orientated. Now, if the man was left to make this investment decision, it could be almost like on Power Trading Radio sometimes, I'll have a viewer call in and say, hey, what do you think of this stock? I'm going to buy it. And I look at it and I go, did you look at it? Did you think about it at all? Or you just got so excited that your emotions wrapped you up and said, buy it? So the checks and balances might be that individual saying, hold on a second. How about we put on a little piece of paper and map out the pros and cons of this investment? What's it going to do for us? How's it going to help us? And be methodical about it. That helps balance things out. And it's not to say that that impulsive decision wouldn't have been a good decision. It's just saying let's hold off, think about it for a second, and we might still make that decision. We might not. But this is where checks and balances are critical to me, is help balancing out our decision-making process. All right, men are going to hate me now. There's a broad generalization that says that men are stubborn. I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you're with your significant other, right? The husband's driving, the wife's in the passenger seat, and you're going to see a Tchaikovsky. Well, I don't want to go Tchaikovsky. Let's go to. You're going to go to a. I was going to say a Tom Petty concert, but that's just not going to work. You're going to see. How come every artist I want to think of right now has passed away? You're going to see the Rolling Stones. How about that? Okay, so you're going to see the Rolling Stones concert, and you're trying to find the music venue. And the husband's driving, I know it's here somewhere. And the wife's saying, well, why don't we just ask for directions? And the husband, no, I know where it's at. No, why don't we ask for directions? And the husband keeps driving around in circles. Pretty soon you end up getting lost. And finally the woman rolls on the window. Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to this amphitheater here so we can see the concert? The point is, I don't think that it's just men are stubborn because that's in our DNA. I think it's pride. I think that we have this responsibility that we should know where we're going. We should be the ones in charge. We should be the ones that pick the restaurants when we go out to dinner. We should know where we're going. So there's almost this prideful piece about asking for help, that we should already know it. Whereas women tend to be willing to ask for help very quickly. And maybe not as much, I don't want to say not as much pride, but maybe a little bit less. It doesn't hurt them as bad to ask for help. Now, when you have a situation where you have somebody who's stubborn and making decisions on their own, and then you have somebody who is going to be willing to ask for help, doesn't that balance things out? Excuse me. Doesn't that kind of help make that decision process a little bit easier and better for both involved? Absolutely. Now, our final one here is risk takers. Generally, we have a situation where men like to take a little bit of risk. Now, that's not, again, not a bad thing. It kind of, think of it as an amplifier. An amplifier meaning when a man is taking a risk or an individual is taking too much risk, they might have huge gains. Of course, they may also have huge losses. Now, with a woman, generally, and I see this on the trading floor all the time, they tend to be a little bit risk averse. Now, if we take too much risk, bad thing. We could have great rates of return. We could also lose a lot. If we're risk averse and we don't take any risk, we also have problems, right? Ultimately, our rates of return might be significantly impacted. Let's say that our risk taker gets a rate of return of 20% in 1 year. Okay, great rate of return, right? But they also could risk losing 10 or 15% a year. If I take that heavy risk taker and I offset that with someone who's risk averse, and that risk averse, well, they might be making 2% a year. You look at that by itself and you go, well, that's not enough. But if I take someone who might be looking at 20%, well, what if we can merge those two together? I take my heavy risk taker, my risk manager, or my risk aversion, and all of a sudden now we're getting a rate of return of, let's say, 10 to 12%. And we've done that in a safer environment. We've analyzed our investments. We've looked at them as a team, thought about what's best for us, and acted on that. Now, why is this important? Because we're in a society now where we have the man and the woman both contributing to our household income. A portion of that obviously is going for daily expenses, food, maybe saving for college, some 401ks. With the investments, though, we have been taught, we have been conditioned to get a financial advisor, to have that individual manage our personal finances for us. And there's a phrase one of my old mentors taught me a long, long time ago. It says, you can trust two people in life. You can trust yourself and you can trust your mother. And do you really trust your mother? Think of financial advisors. What's their interest? Their interest is to make themselves money. If you make money in the process, that's great. But number one goal is that they make money. If you bring in your partner as a, let's call it a consultant, they may not know about financial markets or financial education. Well, you know what? Get them educated in personal finance. When you bring them into the equation, now who's looking out for your best interest? Is it a financial advisor who's got their own kids, their own cars, their own homes and vacations to take care of, and you're going to subsidize that? Or would it be your spouse who is looking at the same goals and objectives that you are? Your kids, your college, your home, your retirement. That's why you want to bring them in, because there's this synergy and a common goal objective. And if one person is leading that charge, you open yourself up to a little bit of risk. There could be problems involved with that. When we bring in that partner, we balance things out. We might not take as big of risks, but we're going to get probably more consistent, less volatile rates of return. So what do we learn? Well, we've learned a couple things. Number one, women are living a lot longer than men. 5 years. I'm hoping a little bit longer than get that 5 years back myself, but we are learning that they have a little bit of a head start there with regards to living longer. So that said, we know that they are now contributing more than ever. We've seen this evolution from that historical Leave It to Beaver 40s type of lifestyle where the woman just cooked and cleaned, which wasn't very fair, to a situation where we're almost equals with regards to paying contributions into homes. And I'm reading some stats now that say that women actually are making more money than men, which is that's a brand new change that's just happening right now. But we'll have to bring up some stats on a later session to talk about that. but they're contributing more than ever. So we do know we now have these two family incomes, which means it's a good thing. We have more money coming in. Let's both be involved in that decision to manage that money. It should be done as a team, a partnership, and be willing to listen to your partner. A lot of times they will bring in the voice of reason, as I like to call it, where they're going, you really want to buy this specific security, but why? Have you looked at this, which I found that might be contradictory to your thoughts about why you want to buy that. Be open-minded and allow that person to share their voice, because the more that we voice our opinions, the more we contribute, again, the more we can achieve our common goals. Now, I mentioned earlier that everybody brings something to the table. Now, as I ran through that table earlier, not all men are impulsive isn't necessarily a bad thing. Stubborn isn't necessarily a bad thing either. But we want to make sure that we have somebody to counterbalance those approaches. The impulsiveness, the risk-taking one. The risk-taking one is probably the worst that I have seen with regards to trading. And it's for a particular reason. I'll walk you back just historically to the trading floor days back in the late 90s. I watched individuals, men in their 40s and 50s come in with, let's say, $750,000. One individual just sold his company, and he came in with $750,000, and he was a real hotshot, knew it all, ego through the roof. And he was my student. And I told him, look, I was pretty much at that point his spouse, saying, here's how you do it. Be careful, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this. And he just goes, disregarded everything I said. Proceeded to lose $750,000 within a few months. Now, if he had just listened and applied a third of what I told him, he wouldn't have lost that money. Instead, he lost it very quickly because he was stubborn and impulsive. So having a checks and balances, if he had somebody there that he would listen to and trusted to look after his best interests, maybe a spouse, he'd be in a totally different place right now. So we can be reckless with our money. It's nice having somebody there to help us balance it out. Each person will bring something to the table, and it may be the other way around. As the husband, you might be risk averse. You might be the better planner, and your wife is the impulsive one who's really the risk taker. Great, that's fine too. But let's have checks and balances so we all have a synergy together and we keep each other in check. Now, the understanding the expenses is a key one, and I talked about this. Whoever is doing the budgeting and planning in your home probably has a greater understanding of where the money is going. And they definitely need to be a part of the planning process. The biggest challenge that most people have with regards to retirement is there is no plan in place. They're just putting money willy-nilly into a 401k plan and hoping it turns out to be a good lump sum at the end. But if you have a plan, a written document, let's write a document out and structure something. Let's take our household income, and whoever does the budgeting knows it intimately. Let's write that all out and start to develop a plan. But again, do this as a team. Investing, finances should all be done as a partnership. Just like you're going to grow your family as a partnership, the finances are what's going to drive that family through college and through retirement. So let's get together. Let's start working together as a team to make that happen. Today's discussion was called The Power of Partnership, Women and Personal Finances. If you are a woman watching this right now, I'm very happy to have you with us. I hope that you get more informed about personal finances and start to become more involved in your household situation. If you're a man right now and your wife's not a part of this, bring them in. Put your ego aside if you have one. Bring them in because it's going to be better for everybody involved. If you'd like to learn more about personal finance and education, I would encourage you to click on the link here, which is www.otwebinar.com for more information. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.